Thank you, Jenny, for providing our delightful music. I'm Dean Sampson, a member of the board, and I'm here to make today's announcements. First and foremost is today is the last day to sign up for events on our first since the pandemic event fundraising gatherings. And as you can see on the back table, we have, I think, 16 events back there. We're encouraging everybody to, can't hear. Is that better? Oh, thank you. Encouraging everybody to look at all those great events and sign up if you're interested. On March 26th, which is traditional the last Tuesday of every month, Cedars, in conjunction with Kol Shalom Synagogue, provides super suppers at the Eagle Harbor Congregational Church, and anybody that'd like to participate, it's a great fun way to spend an evening and provide some good food to a lot of folks in the neighborhood. On March 31st, there is a special collection for the People's Harm Reduction Alliance. Now, the Beacon has a description of what the PHRA is, and so encourage everybody to support that wonderful organization. And finally, in the form of a long-term notification, General Assembly this year is in June, and it is virtual, and Cedars, as always, is looking for delegates. So if you are interested or would like to find out more about it, encourage you to contact Reverend Zachary or one of the members of the board. And I believe that the primary focus, no, that's not right. It's just one of the big discussions will be about the Article 2, thank you, which is a change in the bylaws. So with that, I thank you all for being here.
Before I offer our opening words for this service, I'd like you all to take a moment. I know we had some time to chat, but just to welcome each other into this space, say hello to someone if you haven't seen them before, but just take a time to greet one another. Good morning. On Tuesday, April 4th, 1967, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a speech titled, "Beyond Vietnam, a Time to Break Silence." It was 1 year to the day before he was assassinated. In this speech, MLK advocated for a radical revolution of values that would reorient us towards life and each other. He said, "We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from thing-oriented society to person-oriented society. When machines and computers' profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs to be restructured. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on social programs, social uplift programs, is approaching spiritual death. It has been almost 57 years since these words were shared in a New York City church. And yet, in many ways, they feel just as relevant to us today, in this very moment of history that we find ourselves in. Yesterday, a small group of us from Cedars went down to the Washington State History Museum in Tacoma to see an exhibit about the Poor People's Campaign. A campaign that was launched not long after this 1967 speech and continued after Martin Luther King's assassination. Despite the 57 years that separate us from that speech and where we are today, I can't help but hear the resonance between then and now. Consider this quote from the exhibit. In 1968, 2/3 of Americans over 65 were retired or out of work. After leaving the workforce, their income dropped by 50%, while living expenses increased, including the cost of insurance and health care. Poverty not only affected the unemployed and underemployed, it also affected the quality of life for the elderly. I know from conversations with some of you that this issue impacts us. It impacts people in this community, and if not in this room this morning or online, it impacts people we know. Poverty impacts us all. As we come into this space, may we realize this and reflect on the call that we are being called to change these systems. The call that calls us to spark a revolution of values that our time and the time before us have called us to. Come, let us worship together.
I wonder about the experience of living in poverty. How is it experienced? I remember a time when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old in the early 1970s, when my parents thought that eating was more important than paying rent. They hadn't paid the rent in months. We avoided phone calls from the landlords by not answering the phone the first time, but everyone who we wanted to talk to, friends, relatives, they knew the procedure. Call, let the phone ring 3 times, hang up, wait 15 seconds, call back, and we would answer. As a child, this was my experience living in a house. We had food. And I don't remember not feeling safe. And so I assume that I felt safe. In the extreme case, I think about the homeless on the streets in Seattle. My observation of one man over a period of months in 2019, waking in the morning under scavenged blue tarps hung from a road closed sign under the viaduct when it still existed. Nothing much to do all day. Passers-by avoid making eye contact. Passers-by avoid saying hello. Because we're told not to give money to these people. Give it to shelters or food banks instead. This is one experience. It is to be ignorable. The less extreme case, I think, is more difficult to imagine. The poet Rainier Maria Rilke wrote a novel, a single novel. The title is The Notebooks of Malta Lorid's Brigga. Calling it a novel is a bit of a stretch. It's more of a semi-autobiographical collection of thoughts, totally without plot. The main character and narrator, Brigga, is poor, living in Paris in 1910. Brigga describes several people living in the middle space on the continuum with easy subsistence on one end and extreme poverty on the other. He describes a pregnant woman walking to the hospital, inching ponderously along a high sun-drenched wall, occasionally touching it as if seeking assurance that it was still there. And then another person Brigga describes, a child breathing in iodoform pommes frites, fear. That was simply the way it was. The main thing was to be living. That was the main thing. And then there is Brigga himself. He says, "The suit I wear every day is starting to show signs of wear. Although my collar is clean and my wrists are beyond reproach, there are conclusions that people draw from the cleanliness of my wrists, and people draw them. But nevertheless, there are those who are not deceived by my wrists and are unimpressed. They give me one look and they know that I am really one of them. Friends don't know me anymore and become strangers." When my wife, Arlene, and I were living in a poor neighborhood in Bremerton, and our kids were maybe 6 and 4, they had a friend from down the street. His name was William. I don't know much about William's family, but they lived in half of a run-down duplex. They had a big TV. One day, William was in our house when he became distracted by, he was just standing and staring at this bunch of bananas that was on the table. Arlene said, "William, would you like a banana?" And he nodded. She gave him a banana. What was William's experience of being poor? Like mine, poor but safe, maybe? Like a character in Rilke's novel, poor but things could still go either way? Certainly not yet totally ignorable. I dedicate the lighting of our flaming chalice for the hope of more justice. Please join with me in repeating our affirmation as printed in your order of service. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we will all become the best that we can be.
We're ready this morning to add the fourth part to our round. You did a wonderful job last week with 3 parts, so it's 4 parts today. And just a reminder, if you haven't been here before when we've done it, hang on to rejoice and slow down at the end, and I'll tell you when to stop. Keep singing until you get the signal to stop. Okay, Jenny's going to give us the beginning note.
Tell us who's in which group.
Oh, let's divide first.
This group of intrepid brothers and sisters is group 1. We're going to start. Group 2, group 3, group 4. Group 2 follows.
I was wondering, maybe the first time we do it, we'll do it in 3 parts like we did it last time, and then we'll do it one more time in the 4th part. And now you probably know it well enough so you can do a little listening and see how harmonic and melodious you sound. Okay.
I don't know that that's going to help us.
You don't think it'll help?
No.
Let's ask them. Let's ask the right away 4 parts?
Yes.
Okay. Right away 4 parts.
Sing it all at once, all together.
One time through.
We can do that.
I'm just asking.
Let's do it in 4 parts. Let's give them way together.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Sing and rejoice, sing and rejoice, let all things living now sing and rejoice, sing and rejoice, sing and rejoice, let all things living now sing and rejoice, sing and rejoice, sing and rejoice.
The other day, Patricia and I had a wonderful conversation, and she complimented my singing, and I told her the thing about it is I'm terrified when I do it. And so I love these moments when we can start singing together and growing our musicality as a community, and to know that even I get scared doing it sometimes. We're in this together. I have 2 short stories, and I will try to keep them short, that I want to share with us this morning. These are stories that you probably are familiar with, and so I'm going to tell my versions of them. So if the details are a little bit different, let's just go with it. So long ago, there was a man who was traveling from where he lived to a city that was about 20 miles away. And he was traveling on foot along the side of this dusty road when suddenly a group of robbers came upon him. They overtook the man. They beat him up, took all of his money, all of his possessions, even his clothing, and left him in a ditch. Not long after this happened, there was a man from the village who knew this other guy, but they weren't really friends, and they lived different lifestyles. And he came walking by, saw the man in the ditch, and kept going. Shortly thereafter, let's call him a minister, came walking by this same path of the road, saw the man laying there in the ditch, and kept going. A while later, a third person comes along, and she was someone who was a Samaritan. And let's just say that the Samaritans were not liked by many people. They were kind of seen as being maybe selfish or an insular group that wasn't open to outsiders. But despite this reputation, as this woman came walking along the road and saw the man in the ditch, she stopped. She helped him up, and together they hobbled to a nearby inn. There, the Samaritan woman paid the innkeeper and said, "Tend to this man until he is well. Give him whatever he needs, food, clothing, a place to sleep. And in a month I will come back, and if the money I have given you, if his needs have exceeded the money I have given you, I will pay more." That's our first story. The second story involves a young prince who, when he was born, a prophecy was given. And the prophecy said that this young prince would either grow up to be a great and powerful ruler, or else to be a holy man. The father, who was a king, wanted his son to grow up and be a king just like him. But that's not how life always works out. The king tried everything to keep his son from experiencing anything that might set him down a path towards becoming a holy man. He kept him in a walled-off palace, gave him everything he needed so he never had to think about the world. But as with many young people, eventually this young prince's curiosity got the better of him. And one day, when no one was looking, he went out into the palace gardens, and there he climbed a tree and went over the wall. This was his first time out in the world. He went walking through the town that surrounded the palace, and soon as he was walking, he noticed that there, sitting on a corner, was an old man. An old man was sitting there begging. The prince had never seen an old person. That was another thing. His father made sure that he wasn't aware that people got old and died. That might cause him to become a spiritual leader. The young prince continued through the village, and as he did, suddenly he sees there also another person laying on a mat on the ground, sick. This young prince had never seen someone ill. That was hidden from him too. He continues getting farther and farther and finds himself in an alley where there in the alley is a body. Now you can imagine his father actually tried to keep this from him too, but now he saw the face of mortality. He turned and started to go back to the palace, not sure what to think, and as he approached the wall, sitting in meditation under a tree, was a monk. He stopped and talked with that monk. And from that day forward, this young prince's life was forever changed. He renounced his riches and committed himself to finding the cause and end of suffering. If you don't know this story, it's the story of Siddhartha, the man who we know as the Buddha. And that is our stories for today. invite you to take a deep breath in and out. Center yourself in this moment as we pause together to reflect in silence. Spirit of life, mystery that called us into this existence, I come with this question. How long must people go without? How long must people go without water, without food, without electricity or a place to call home? All while at the same time the debate continues to rage about what to do. How long will we continue when we know that we already have enough to fix the problem? Enough resources, enough food to go around. There are enough places for people to live. Stuff enough to make sure no one goes without. And yet we continue. How long must people go without? Go without love, without understanding, without being seen for the beings that they are, without real, genuine connection to others, or that sense of belonging that we crave. I ask these questions knowing that the response to these questions, the response to this reality, rests with us. May we recognize the power that we have today to shape the future, to be more just, more equitable, and more loving. Amen, and blessed be.
On many Sundays, we set aside some time for the sharing of joys and sorrows. If you have a joy or a sorrow that you would like to share, please come forward, state your name, and in a few brief sentences, share your joy or sorrow. For a sorrow, place a stone in the bowl so that we may all share your burden. For a joy, pour a little water in the bowl so that we may all be buoyed up. As a reminder, this part of the service is neither live streamed nor recorded. final stone in the bowl and pour a little more water for all of the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, held delicately in our hearts.
Is it, what? We are now having our centering hymn of our service. It's hymn number 123 in our gray hymnal, Spirit of Life. Sorry.
I know that many people, including many of you, have given so much to Cedars. Now is that time during the service where we ask, what's a little more? Of course, everything that has been given up till this point is economically considered a sunk cost and shouldn't be used to justify further giving. However, that's not the way human brains work. So, if you are visiting for the first time, please feel free to let the baskets pass you by. We are happy simply that you are with us today. Would the ushers come forward to collect the offering? Thank you for your gifts.
There we go. Not long after my husband, Elliot, and I got married in 2013, I remember us having a conversation one day. It started when I noticed that the new neighbor family who moved in next door to us in the rental house had a trampoline, and it looked really fun. But the thing I know about being an adult gay man is it's not appropriate to go ask a random kid if you can jump on their trampoline. So I did the next thing. I turned to Elliot, and I asked, "Can we get a trampoline?" "No," he replied. "Please?" "No, they're too white trash." We both laughed, as we do about a lot of things, and I never seriously pushed the issue again, and especially now as a homeowner, I don't want my insurance rates to go up. However, at the time, about a week later, I was on the phone talking with my mom and told her what Elliot had said about getting a trampoline and how they were too white trash. She laughed and told me to, quote, "Tell him tough. You married white trash, you're stuck with him now." That's my mom for you. Always knowing the right thing to say to start a years-long family joke. But at the same time, I do wonder if sometimes, especially in this situation, if this humor, this laughing at it, is just a way of me trying to distance myself from facing the reality. The reality my mom was so quick to affirm. You're poor white trash. To quote the recent book, Trash, Poor White Journey, and there's a picture of it on the front of your cover, your order of service. I know a few of you have copies and have been reading it. If you haven't heard me talk about it yet, you probably will beyond just today, because I think it's an important and really great book. But in this book, written by chaplain, activist, and theologian Cedar Monroe, Cedar writes this: "Capitalism creates trash. It calls all the mess created on the land after clear cuts and oil spills waste. Trash. What system takes all the beauty and power of the world and nature and turns it into trash? Then packages everything you need to survive in more waste, and then calls it trash. Mountains of it, oceans full of it, poor communities choked with it, homeless camps drowning in it. And then there are the people who are called trash, my people, our labor, the only thing we have to sell." In this quote, and in the rest of the book, when Cedar is talking about my people, they're talking about the people here in Washington State in Grays Harbor County, just a few hours down on the coast, the place where I grew up. To help paint a bit of a cultural scene of where these people, my people, live, I share these words, spoken at the U.S. Capitol by someone from Grays Harbor County. She says, "My name is Mishaila Buckmaster. I'm 29 years old. I'm a single mother. I was homeless for 5 years of my life. I'm celebrating 2 years in recovery. I'm from Grays Harbor County, Washington State. I live in a tiny town where it is easier to get loaded than to find food or shelter. A town that's so small it only has one stoplight. So small, but the people feel so far away from each other. The better off act like my friends are better off dead." I can attest to Mishaila's experience that she shares here. I went to high school with Mishaila. She was a good friend of mine, actually, and for a time of about 2 years lived with my family when her aunt and uncle, who she was living with, kicked her out. That was commonplace in Grays Harbor County for kids to live with other families. It was never formally recognized as a dynamic that was enforceable or official. There were times in my own high school experience, my 10th grade year, when I spent the entire year staying at my friend Brittany and Hayden Litterer. Didn't feel safe going home, and soon my older sister Sadie joined me at the Litterer house too. I stopped coming home because it wasn't safe. There wasn't always food. We constantly were getting those phone calls that Gregory talked about, bills that we were behind on. That was when we had a phone, which we went several years without one. Another thing I laugh about as an adult from this time is how we used to chain our dog to the power meter so the utilities couldn't be shut off. We had a big black chow chow. I've always felt lucky to know how things have turned out for me. And I say lucky because I recognize it could have turned out any number of different ways. How precarious this thing we call life is. The choices that we make that set us on courses. I don't know if it's anything other than luck and maybe a little bit of determinism, but a lot of luck. Beyond this unofficial foster care system, many people in Grays Harbor County here in our state are homeless. My older sister, who lives in Aberdeen, has a family who live in an abandoned house across the street from her. I don't know who owns the house, but they've been there for years. The roof is caved in, and so they've set a tent up in the living room to provide them a place to live. People live other places in tents, in shacks along the Chehalis River, forced to the literal edge of the continent. It's about as far west as you can get before hitting the Pacific Ocean. Nowhere to go. Hundreds of people with nowhere else to go. This is what Cedar spends a lot of their book exploring. They write this about the scene that I described along the Chehalis River, at a camp that is referred to as the river. Cedar writes, "At the river, homelessness was in full view of a town who did not want to see it. At its core, the river was the last place for poor people, white and native, black and brown, to pitch a fight for survival. They pitched a fight for survival, to have a place to be. A few years ago, the city of Aberdeen, Washington, tried to evict all of the people living in this camp. And it went to the state Supreme Court, and it was found that unless an alternate place to be could be found, people had a right to be there. People need places to exist. Everyone needs to belong somewhere." In the book, The Pedagogy of the Poor, Willie Baptist describes the mythology that surrounds economically abandoned places like Appalachia and the river down in Grays Harbor County. He writes, "Rampant poverty is usually explained by backwardness of a region that was, quote, left behind by the Industrial Revolution. But it is more accurate to say that Appalachia was an internal colony that made the Industrial Revolution possible by providing the industry with the raw materials needed." When people first settled down in Grays Harbor County, it wasn't long before they started taking advantage of the abundant timber. In the late 1800s, it was believed that more millionaires lived in Aberdeen, Washington than any other city in the country, all from the timber boom. In its heyday, commercial fishing was an economic engine that drove the community. Whole families were supported. Overfishing, poor regulation have ended that. This place that once supplied all of the timber to build homes and buildings around the world is forgotten. The people who make it out are often hesitant to go back, and I don't always blame them. In my own life, as someone who grew up poor, I have felt a tension of self-hate since becoming the first person in my family to go to college. I've always felt kind of at odds with where I came from and where I am. As I was thinking about this and tried to come up with an image, the thing that came to mind is an image of me standing with one foot on two separate rafts, one foot on a raft, as I try to float down a river, being pulled in different directions, constantly being pulled and trying to stay upright. In the book Trash, Cedar describes their wrestling with this same dynamic by saying this: as I started to develop my ideas, I almost immediately ran against opposition. Not from just the conservative, white, religious group I had grown up with, but also in liberal higher education. I realized that I was expected, once educated, to leave behind my past and poor white communities that had raised me. When Willie Baptist asserts that poverty is moralized, when poverty is moralized, a tremendous moral pressure is placed on the poor, making them feel like failures and thus destroying their self-esteem. It's for this reason that so many people who grow up poor, whether in Grays Harbor or Appalachia or anywhere, when they get out, they often never turn back. We often think of poverty as a moral failing, and that if we are able to climb out of that situation, we have somehow succeeded morally. Cedar says that if we want to understand poverty in the United States, that we cannot understand it without first understanding this. It is normative across professions, from clergy to social workers, from teachers to lawyers, to judges, the decisions of other people, to judge the decisions of other people, the decisions that they make for themselves, decisions of survival. The reality is that the majority of people in this country are poor. And if not poor, working class. How many paychecks can you go without until you no longer have a roof over your head? What choices have you had to make about prioritizing things in your life? Is it more important to have the roof or the food? And yet, despite this, many of us are led to believe that we are better off. We are better off than poor people in places like Grays Harbor, or poor people on the streets of Seattle. And let's be honest, in many ways we are better off, but we are not better than. We are better off, but we are not better than. Recognizing this, I can't help but have a degree of admiration for people like Cedar Monroe or Prince Siddhartha all those years ago, or that Good Samaritan. All individuals who saw something wrong. They saw suffering, illness, poverty, and death. And instead of turning away and saying, "It doesn't impact me," they stopped and used their resources to lend aid. At the beginning of our service, I mentioned that a group of us went down to Tacoma yesterday to see an exhibit about the Poor People's Campaign. It was a great outing, and I would love to do things like that again. It was just wonderful. But I had a few takeaways from this exhibit. First, I shared in the opening words this reality of how poverty impacts the quality of life for our elders. If you think about a social justice analysis of privilege, it is oftentimes said that people under the age of 18 and people over the age of 65 are in positions of disadvantage. Poverty affects the people in these age groups the most. We also know it affects everyone in the middle as well. Beyond that, the takeaway that I took from our time at the museum was the power of people coming together. And yet, even in coming together, the work is never done. Thousands of people camped for over a month on the Washington Capitol Mall in tents built with the help of architecture professors and city planners. Community activities were happening. People were demanding universal income, housing, food, healthcare. Some changes came about from this social movement. But how many of those demands are still relevant today? We need to come together. Whether you are poor yourself or you know someone who is poor, whether you are rich, we need to come together to build coalitions of people who are willing to continue this work that will never fully be done. To the glory of life. I'd like to invite us to rise as you are willing and able as we prepare to sing our closing hymn of the service. Shall we gather at the river? I lost my order of service, which is 10:46.
Can you give us a key, Dennis?
I lost.
We're
Please repeat after me as we extinguish our flaming chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. The warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Our service has ended, but our service to the world and one another begins anew. As we go forth, may we know that we are powerful beings who are deeply connected with each other, and when we realize that power and connection, we can change the world. May it be so.